there's a mistake in the video. He bangs his guitar as a sort of thump, and that was because when he did it, he made a thump, and I was like, "Oh, we'll do that again." No, it's fine. It was totally the opposite to the Adrenalize mindset. So, and Sav is always the guy who will put the hours in the studio. The first time Mutt came over during Euphoria, so later on, and Viv had never really worked with him. And after the first day, Mutt had been in the studio, and he went, and Viv went, "Wow."
Hey everyone, before we get underway with part 3 here, I want to give a shout out to the excellently named Def Leppard podcast, Def Leppard Pod. They have a lot of great episodes already. The most recent one, a deep dive into the album Retroactive, so be sure to check that out. That album is one of the ones Pete's going to be discussing here, along with Vault and Slang, so I hope you enjoy the video.
At the time, you had to have CD singles, and each CD single would have 3 B-sides. So an album like that, where you're thinking there's going to be 5 singles maybe, that's a whole load of B-sides are needed. And again, Mike was going back to London to see his wife at the weekends because she was heavily pregnant. And I'd said to Joe, come on, let's do B-sides. Let's write, you got songs. And that was a release. That was a laugh, we'd have, because it was quite in the week.
Yeah.
This finishing off this masterpiece. But the fun, the energy of the B-sides was 2 steps behind was that he and I had done a demo that was all programmed and him playing guitars and just Joe. And he said, I've got to get the band doing this. And the band were having a break. I can't remember. There weren't that many breaks. Anyway, they were flying back to LA. And Phil said, well, why don't we do it acoustically? Because it'd be quick. And Joe said, oh, okay. So the whole band sat there. Sav had an acoustic bass. And they all, just played it in kind of one take. And Rick was shaking and stuff on it, yeah. And then Joe sang it one night, and then the next night sang it again, and I bounced between the two. And I was at the time going, oh God, these back, they'd done the backing vocals. Whatever it is. I was going, man, they're out of tune. They're and in the context of Adrenalize, where everything was so perfect, it was like, oh, these, I was thinking, I'm going to get the blame for this. And they said, don't worry. It's actually, it mentions it on Vault on the sleeve. It's like, don't worry, it'll never come out. It's not even a D-side. It'll be fine. I said, oh, well, if it comes out, if that gets released with my name on it, I quit. And then it was sent off as not even when it was a B-side before to the management. And then it got to this film thing, and Michael Kamen put strings on it. Mike mixed it in LA, and it came out and was a hit, which was quite funny. And that was done. And even when Vault was being put together, I remember saying, how can that song that was done so quickly and so spontaneously, there's a mistake in the video. He bangs his guitar as a sort of thump. And that was because when he did it, he made a thump, and I was like, oh, we'll do that again. No, it's fine. It was totally the opposite to the Adrenalize mindset.
Yeah.
And quite hard to deal with. But yeah, so the B-sides were all done every weekend. So Mike would go away on a Friday, and we'd sort of be like naughty kids, and with Joe and with everyone, do fun B-sides. And Action was, I think, same time, and all those B-sides. And so that kind of led to the end. Retroactive was, what can we put out, scratching our heads while figuring out what to do next. Retroactive was, I think we had 3 weeks at Bow Lane Studios in Dublin, not Joe's studio, a little studio in central Dublin that some friends of ours owned. Owen Drum ran it, and Joe McDonald was there, and it was great. It was a fun place. And so we had 3 weeks to kind of tart up everything for all the B-sides, all the songs that were selected to be on Retroactive. And then I was going to mix it later, but it was a hectic time, so I really have no memory of which. I do remember one great thing, which drummers will say, "Oh yeah, that's easy." But in Action, in the middle 8, there's a bit where he goes right. And to those who are aware of the band, Rick only has one arm, so doing that would be really hard. So he did, and I said, "Fine." It sounded great, and he said, "Right, go back." And on another track, he did the upbeats.
Wow.
Which is, it's pretty amazing. I thought it's like to go.
Yeah, to be do it in 2 takes separately. Yeah, that's that's quite something. Yeah.
Yeah, so so it was Retroactive was fun for me. It was all the B-sides we'd been doing over the album, and it was a release, and it was great. And then
So what was that like for you moving into, the mixing role, co-producing role? How did you feel about
when
doing that?
when
And
when Peter Mensch rang up and said, their manager at the time said, "Hey Woodroffe, we're going to put out 2 steps behind, and the guys are going to give you a production credit." I said, "Production credit." Unproduced, because it was like, and if you look on the record, it says unproduced by
hmm,
Def Leppard and Pete Woodroffe, and yeah, even in the movie it says that. So yeah, it was great. It was a good
of
thing.
course, that album you debuted with your playing piano on "Miss You in a Heartbeat," you're credited as.
Joe had the part, and then he said, "Oh, you have a go." So I played it, and then he said, "Oh," and then he could do the middle eight. I couldn't do that. So literally the two of us played. I did the verses and the.
With having to record Adrenalize like that and take a lot of time, when it came around to doing something like Slang, how much of relief was that for you and the band to do something a bit more traditional
The
sounding?
working title Sav had was "Mustn't Grumble," because there was a feeling that they could, that it wasn't going to be an easy time for the band. They knew that, you know, music had changed, but the German guy I worked with, Herbert, he'd done the first album I worked with him, recording it, I was engineering it. He'd said his band were 30 years old, and they'd always worked in the studio in the city, and they'd all come into work. And he said, "I want to rent somewhere and get them out." And so we rented a house in Belgium and had a cook who used to come in, and we all lived there, and it was an absolute hoot. And it was really, it's like being teenagers again, because you're in a silly gang making records. And so I thought that would be a great idea with Slang, to try and just get away and do it somewhere isolated without all the phones. And as you get successful, I think if you're doing it in Joe's house, he's always got the fax machine in the office upstairs. But actually, if you're in the south of Spain, you don't. And so it's good. It was really good. But it was also a challenge. We'd technology had changed completely. You could make a record at home. Before we did Slang? I think it was. The band had bought these little ADATs, which are 8-track digital recorders that use videotapes, and you could hook 2 of them together or 4 of them together and have 4 videotapes, and that would be like a 32-track multi-track. So, and there was a remote control that would control 4 machines. So they all had studios at home now with 2 ADATs, and they could just write stuff, play around, do stuff. So before Slang, did a kind of world tour of going to their home studios and saying, "Okay," I even wrote a little instruction manual of how to make vocals sound good. And we set up their little home studios, and Phil and I did some demos at his place, and Viv, did Viv? I can't remember. Yeah, they all had home studios, and Joe had one. And so that was kind of, songs were emerging. And the idea was, let's just listen to what's cool. And everyone loved the music, Stone Temple Pilots and Soundgarden, Super Unknown, just incredible records. So the band just absorbed that, enjoyed it, and we almost said, anything that sounds like Def Leppard, that we can't do that. So it was a conscious decision to head off. And also, they had the safety net of Mutt. If you're writing with Mutt in the room, he's amazing. Mutt is the most incredible songwriter, musician, arranger. You can't underestimate his talent. I remember Viv, the first time Mutt came over during Euphoria, so later on, and Viv had never really worked with him. And after the first day, Mutt had been in the studio, and he went, and Viv went, "Wow." And Viv had worked with loads of big producers like Peter Wolf, and he just suddenly thought, yeah. And so Slang, there was no Mutt, so it was almost a fresh start. And it was great. It was lovely to do as well. I mean, it was down in Spain, and
So a lot more freedom for the band just to do whatever they feel like.
Still working 10 a.m. till midnight, 6 days a week.
So with that musical direction, like you say, they didn't want to do anything that was like Def Leppard sounding of the past. How did you find? Did that kind of coincide as well? Did that help Viv come in more with the songwriting too? I mean, can I get the impression that when he first joined the band, I guess he never experienced the Def Leppard way of, let's say, how you guys did? would have done Adrenalizer, let's say Hysteria, even before
Yeah.
Pyromania. It seemed to be a while before Viv was able to kind of contribute.
He probably thought it was a confusing trick, that it was some kind of candid camera that we're all sitting in a house with a drum kit set up in a sitting room. um, I think when we did Euphoria, he realised the terrible poison chalice he'd been given. No, but Slang, we took a long time. It was a lot of work. There was the problem I had is we wanted it to be just the band. So it's me, Stan, the guitar tech, and Malvin, who had been Steve's guitar tech but was now their tour manager, and the three of us kind of made the record. So we had a diesel generator outside. I'd say, Stan, you have put diesel in the generator? He goes, yeah, it's fine. And he told me afterwards he'd sort of sneak out and fill it up. But we had the ADATs were kind of the first generation of these things, and if the heads got dirty, the little display would come up with the word "no-fo," which means no format, and you'd have to swap out the machine and put a new one in. And so we had 4 working up and running and 4 spares in a corner of the room. And it's fine if you're working, you say, oh, we've got to swap out a machine. But it's not so fine if you've got Phil, Viv, Sav, all there, done a take of a song, Rick out there playing a real kit, a proper real kit for the first time, Joe coming up with lyrics, and you've done a take. Okay, do one more. I look and I see 3 of the machines are on no flow, and there's no assistant. It's like, right. So it was fun, but it was hard work. Also, technical thing. So there was a remote control, which was a thing called a BRC, and on the back of this there were lots of shiny outputs and stuff, and one of them was 48 kilohertz, and so that was the clock, and the clock was what you'd run Pro Tools on, because the idea with this album was we'd start in Spain, get back to Dublin, and then sit and just go through all the takes, all the drums, edit things together. And now we had this fantastic thing called Pro Tools. It'd be easy and it'd be a joy to work on. So we got back to Dublin after the first 3 months in Spain with all these fantastic and every tape was 4 tapes. So the boxes of tapes, we've got the drums and the bass. Anyway, it was fine. And I had it all kind of written down. I knew what I was doing. And we get the Pro Tools rented in and we plug in the thing and it doesn't work. I'm like, huh? So I ring up Alesis, who make this tape machine. And I go, guys, the 48 kilohertz output on the back of the BRC doesn't work, does it? They go, no, that doesn't work. No. I'm like, right. So we've done this album on the premise that we could relax in Spain and not get all, anal and crazy and timing perfect. Just do it okay, and then we'll chop it all together and it'll be fine. But you're telling us that it won't be able to copy everything digitally. And anyway, the guy said, look, there's a software update coming out, and that might address the problem, but we don't think it will. So the next day, literally a software update came out, and it did address the problem, and it worked. So and Sav is always the guy who will put the hours in the studio. So when we were back in Dublin and I was sitting going through stuff, he'd always be there, kind of being the wise, objective pair of ears. The band has a great dynamic between them.
I was just going to ask, if you ever experienced how the dynamic can be, let's say if things get tough, or if it's like a decision needs to be made. So how do you find the band dynamic in these times?
Joe and Sav are definitely the rock school. Phil is definitely the R&B and far more open. He listens to a load. I mean, though Joe listens to loads of stuff, but that would be the slight thing. And Viv is he loves singer-songwriter, Crowded House. So this is probably 20 years ago. They've all moved on since then. But he wasn't. Everyone thought the management thought he's going to be the sort of rock Dio guy, but he's actually a really great singer. And anyway, so the dynamic would be that Sav would sit there at the back of the control room and say very little. And then me and Phil and Joe would be arguing, what do you think of this and that? And then after about 4 hours, someone would say, well, Sav, what do you think? And he would come up with a very astute paragraph of exactly what we were doing wrong and how it should be done. You go, oh, okay, good idea. So he was always there and listening and being the wise musical one.
Now, of course, during Slang, I believe the record company got in touch and said about releasing Vault.
Howard Berman, yeah.
How was that news taken from the band that they're making an album and they don't want anything to do with, let's say, past Def Leppard sounds? Oh, by the way, we're going to release the greatest hits of all your great past sound. How did that? How did they deal with that?
I think it was fine. I think they felt that, this was a new album and Steve was no longer with us, and there was they felt it bookmarked that part of their career, and so they were cool with it. I think I read somewhere that When Love and Hate Collide was going to be the first single off Slang. Wrong. It never was. It was definitely just a demo kicking around, and it was a really good demo. It's like, oh, that's a good song. And Howard Berman, the head of the record company, had come out and was like, do you have anything for a bonus track? And there was a real time problem. They had to have this for a Christmas release or whatever. They had to have this song. I think we're talking 3 weeks from when he came out. Okay, so so we went through all the songs, songs that are kicking around, because have you got anything that's like really says Def Leppard, Bally, like a kind of big old thing? And so we have got one played in that, and he's like, this is the one. So we had to get it recorded and an orchestra on it as well, and we did it in 2 weeks. It was
wow.
Every day I'd say, right, Joe. Again, we had an ADAT with an ADAT and a mic upstairs, so it's like 2 tracks of the music and then 6 blank tracks. Joe, go and sing. And he'd come down the next day with that night with all the different takes of the vocal and bounce it all together, say, okay, that's good, try that. And he'd go off every day on his own in a cupboard.
Wow.
Yeah, and yeah, we got it done, and it was great.
I always think with When Love and Hate Collide, of course, the demo features the last solo from Steve, so there's a certain charm about that. But I also think that the one on Vault it's got such a timeless sound. I mean, I think it's one of the. I mean, I think it still is my favorite song from the band. It's the song I could listen to all the time and never tire of it. And it's got a weird, like you say, during that time, it's a weird combination of, this is a Def Leppard song, but it's got this sound which isn't, it's not, because you could argue maybe the demo, people say it's like a Love Bites clone, with the percussion and how it's maybe structured with certain guitar parts, but there's something about with what you guys did in that, and to hear it took a couple of weeks to get done. It's
maybe that's why it sounded like it did. There were no choices. They got the demo because Stevie Langer's backing vocals, Stevie Van's backing vocals, were from on the demo, which was a 12-track analog Akai machine they had in Dublin, and someone had to find it in a garage, and it's just a great lyric as well. It's a really poignant, passionate. As a writer now, you kind of,
Looking back, I know I've said before about hindsight, but if Slang opened up a lot of the doors for the band, and let's say certain territories they weren't as successful with before, but was there any kind of thought, we could have made this maybe a bit more commercial with, let's say, having a song like When Love and Hate Collide on it?
I mean, even the song Slang, I felt, and was a bit Def Leppard-y. It was far more things like Where Does Love Go When It Dies, and just good songs. And I think the band had to do it. They literally had to reinvent themselves. And I remember, this is an aside, I was mixing at No Mis Studios in London, that I got a call saying, it was not sure. Anyway, it was, Pete, can you mix a live gig we did in Singapore? I was like, yeah, fine. So you're talking about the different markets and stuff. So recording this gig, and you have a recording all the way through, so you can mix it as one go, or individual songs. I was doing it, I think, individually songs, and at the end of each song there'd be this sort of applause, everyone's happy, and then they did 2 steps behind and the audience went completely insane. I was like, oh, that was our little B-side. And that was the biggest call for them in Singapore at the time. It was like huge.
Seeing how well, let's say, Bon Jovi did in the 90s, how they were able to kind of manage that period for the band, it seems to get to me to think, how come they were able to kind of get away with it, so to speak. I mean, they played Wembley, in the mid 90s. Someone like Bryan Adams, who who had a kind of 80s, thing about them, got through to the 90s and managed to get through. Whereas Def Leppard, even with When Love and Hate Collide getting a number 2 here, they seem to never be able to get to that step where let's say Bon Jovi got to.
Is it because the name Def Leppard kind of, even though they're not metal, they kind of, in the UK especially, had a reputation of being a rock band, and I know Bryan Adams was rock, but he was, everything I do it for you, that kind of, that sold a few tickets.
Yeah.
I don't think it was helped by Let's Get Rocked. The lyric stuff was, Make Love Like a Man, they were both quite, hey, happy rock songs at the wrong time. But then Bryan Adams did some stuff that was, the only thing that looks good on me is you. Bon Jovi wisely did a slight step into country and 12-string guitars and pedal steel guitars, and there was, which was quite smart.
Do you think Def Leppard could have done that? I mean,
Joe, I don't know. Can Joe do country? No, I think they are a rock band. They're a gang, and they did great, and they're now doing, just before the pandemic, they were really happy and doing really great and selling more tickets than ever. They were.
I think I don't know whether you could argue that having to go through that could have made the band even stronger. I mean, they went through a lot anyway up until that point, but it's that, I think they've always said, they, with maybe their background, that kind of working class attitude of like, well, don't get too big for your boots. They've always come across as really grounded and just
always so grounded. I remember going to see Phil probably when I was setting up his studio, and him picking me up at the airport, and he's driving a Ford Fiesta or something. I was like, oh. And Joe had the same Volvo for years, a Volvo Estate that was like 15 years old. Yeah, no, they're really grounded. And that's, I think Mark is also to blame for that, not to blame, but responsible. He's always been, we're lucky to work in this business, and we're trying to compete with the Eagles and Stevie Wonder and people, we just have to work really hard and stay grounded. And but like Slang, Turn to Dust was, I think, something like 128 tracks. It was such a massive production because there was the Indian orchestra, there was the Indian tabla guy, there was the rock stuff, there was the sound effects, the rain in Spain, which at the beginning, it was like a huge old production. And so when people say Slang was quite straightforward, it was really anything but.
All right.
So, but yeah, I mean, that one song, Truth, I liked on, was that Slang?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
My brain's beginning to fry. I should have it all up here.
There was an original version of Truth, or like maybe the demo version, where it was a bit more in your face from the get-go with the guitars and that.
Yeah, because Ronan and Hugh Drum, who were at Bow Lane, we'd said, get on programs and stuff on this, and they did that fantastic. To me, I love the groove of the final version of Truth. Yeah, all the stuff for all the 30 different versions of things on Slang, when they came out, I had no idea. And it's like, oh, hold on. Some of those mixes were like, oh, Pete, I'm going down to the port. Could you run off a rough mix? Yeah, fine. And they were not really meant for public consumption, but it's all good.
Well, I know it's probably asking much to ask you about things back then, but can you recall if there's anything that you've worked on that hasn't seen the light of day, whether it be some sort of random demo or a song that just hasn't been?
Most of the stuff's out, isn't it? They've put out so many rarities and odd things, so I don't have anything kicking around.
It's something you just remind me of that I was going to ask a little while ago with regards to, I think Retroactive was the first time we saw a solo songwriting credit, apart from Steve's instrumental from High and Dry Switch. But on Retroactive, of course, we got songs just from Joe with Two Steps Behind, She's Too Tough, Phil with Miss You in a Heartbeat. And as we move on, there's more examples of that.
The reason there was more solo songwriting, I think, was because they had home studios. So if Phil went home, he'd be able to sit and write on his own and come up with a finished song. And I think that happens with loads of bands. When you start off, you kind of are not entirely sure what you're doing, when you're young. And as you get better, you start to be able to write the whole thing, and you go, hey, it's a finished song.
But like, would you feel if there was a noticeable difference in the songs when it was like a co-write, or if it was? I mean, can you think, oh, that's definitely a Phil song, or yeah, it's definitely a Sav song, or
Definitely, when you get the demos, you can tell a Phil song because it's Phil singing and Sav singing. So yeah, but the the job as a producer is to try and make it sound like the band, I guess.
Mhm.
You know, and I think that works. You know, work it out. Viv's song
Mm.
was very more poppy and not like it. I think has the demo of that turned up ever?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
It's cool.
he listens to music like a 15, 16-year-old kid. He listens to what is exciting. His whole thing was, don't make it sound like a Led Zeppelin record. Make it sound like you imagined Led Zeppelin when you were 15 and you first heard that album.